Hello, everybody. This is Dr. David Lumpert, your Christian psychologist. And today I am very, very pleased that we have Heather Dye. She's a mental health counselor here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, just down the road from me. And she has joined us today as we talk about this book, Attached, a book on attachment for adults and understanding your attachment in relationships. And so we both read the book, both talking about it from both the clinician experience, from how we might use this with our clients, and also, is this a recommendation that we would have for you to read on your own to learn a little bit more about attachment and how it may help you with how you approach your relationships. So good afternoon, Heather. Hopefully you're having a good day.
I am having a good day. Thank you. I'm excited to be talking with you and be talking about the book Attached.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's raining here today, so it's a good day to be inside and talking with friends. So let's get right at it. So I've been wanting to read this book for a while. It's a few years old. It's been on the bestseller list for a long time. As far as helping people understand how they bond and how they connect with people, I think there's some very good lessons in the book. I think it's a very good review of some basic attachment literature and then some strategies for how to understand that in your relationships. So talking a little bit about attachment theory and attachment literature, this all started years and years ago when we're trying to understand how babies attach to moms. We had noticed in hospitals and in various settings that there are some children that had a strong emotional attachment and some children that seemed very distant from their parents. And so there was a whole school of study looking at attachment theory and how babies develop that bond with their mothers. And particularly, most of the time, it was studies of children and mothers as opposed to children and fathers, because moms were just around a lot more with the babies. Now, fast forward about 20 years, researchers started to understand that maybe we need to look at attachment in adults. We'd spent a lot of time looking at personality patterns, communication skills, all sorts of different theories about what's driving the problems in relationships. And this particular group of authors have really focused on how we develop emotional bonds and attachments as adults, and went into discussions on how does that affect how we relate with others. Now, I don't want to hog the discussion here, so I'm going to let Heather give you a little bit of a review on the different types of attachment in adults that the book talks about and the authors talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the first book I've really read that takes those attachment styles that you're talking about in human development. We're talking about moms and babies, and uses it really explicitly for adults. And how are we using it with relationships and bonding? And the three categories it really kind of talks about here are being an anxiously attached person, securely attached, or avoidant attached. So three categories, which, as somebody who likes tools, when I work with people, tools that you can take home and use outside of an office that you're working with a therapist, I think this is great. I think they can pick it up and say, I understand now what it is to be in a category like an anxiously attached adult. And what they're talking about throughout this book in these three categories is, how do I receive and give love to express bonding? And that's where those three categories really reflect what it's like to grow up with mom. So I find it to be good to be categorical when you're taking things home, because you can understand it really well. And I think the authors really speak to people in a terminology that they can get. They can say, oh, I understand what it's like to have my needs met. My needs, someone said needs, feels, and wants. How I express those to others through being anxious, or through being secure, or through being avoidant. Those are the top three categories that we talk about. One thing that they didn't maybe explore as much, touched on a little bit, was the shades of gray between those three categories, where I might have a spectrum between those two, or I might be moving in between for the most part. Mm-hmm.
And as far as a book, as far as a tool, the book spends about a third of its pages reviewing the literature, reviewing the history of attachment research, and then formulating how they create those three categories of attachment in adults. And then the second 2/3 of the book are case examples, different ways of approaching relationships, and a lot more of the applied side. So if you're reading this book, you really can grasp the concepts in the first third of the book. And then it's nice to then apply them as you're looking through the different case examples and the different things that they talk about in the second 2/3 of the book. If you don't want to do that, you could probably just read the first third of the book and then try to move forward with implementing that in life. I think for my clients, I do also, like Heather said, I like a rubric or a framework that doesn't have 30 different things you got to keep track of. It is nice when we can formulate things into 3 categories. Granted, they're broad categories. There's a little bit more nuances when we're talking about interrelationships and how we connect with others, but still being able to start off with 3 major categories that you can start thinking about and becoming either more knowledgeable in your relationship with that particular person and how you're connecting, but also just your way of bonding and connecting. And do you want to change that? I think for a lot of people, they will start off with, this is just the way I am, and it won't change. Now, Heather, after spending time reading the book and knowing what you know about the literature in bonding and attachment, do you believe clinically that people can change these categories, or is this something that they're set in?
Yeah, I like how you said just the way I am, because I am a proponent of giving things a name. So giving things a name helps us understand what it is. So when we have something that we can label, whether it's an emotion, if we're talking emotion, I know it's sadness and I have a name, well, then I can kind of work with it. I can build tools, I can cope, I can do things. So in this book, when you're talking about being anxious, if I know I have a label, I can take the name and then I can work with it. So I think in that aspect, it's very positive that I have something to work with and I can move forward. The hard part is then getting stuck in that label. Is it fluid or is it plastic? The book kind of talks about that a little bit. Can I move from one space to another? We know our identity is who we are, is really who we are, but we can shape and mold who we are into something more refined, right? We can become the best versions of ourselves. So the book does talk about that. What are the ways that you can become better at being anxious or moving toward being more secure with knowing what my name is, what my label is? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very big positive.
Mm-hmm. Now, reading the book, some self-help books, I think, are great with laying out, okay, here's the background, and then here are your stair-step strategies for making change over the course of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. When we look at this book, I didn't get that strong a feeling of here's stair-step, how you do this if you want to make change. What did you pull away from the book in that sense? If people want to make change, is this something that the book covers well? Or is that more going to be something where they're going to maybe need to read some more or possibly work with a provider one-on-one?
Yeah, I think this does actually give a good overlay of what it is that we're talking about. We're defining all the things that it could be, giving it a name, and then we're saying there's some ways we can start doing things. So in the latter chapters that you're talking about, the second half of the book, it does talk about things you can do. There's like sections where it says 8 steps to this, but those are 8 beginning steps. So once I become aware of what's going on, I might need someone to come alongside me. So like you said, pointing to a therapist or pointing to a coach, someone that can say, here's where we are and here's where we can go together to achieve the maximum benefit. So I think it touches on the right thing and raises awareness about what's my bonding style? Maybe what's my partner's bonding style? But then you might have more questions once you discovered the answer to that beginning, right?
And I agree with you on that. I think self-help books like this are a great starting point. And this book is very good in the sense of laying out the theory, getting you thinking, giving you that rubric of categories to start placing yourself and others in. But the next steps are really where the work is done, where people spend more time understanding themselves, how they got here, where they want to get to, what are the steps to change those things. And whether it's continuing to read other books, whether it's continuing to maybe watch a video training program on attachment and development of relationships, or working one-on-one, I think those follow-on steps are really important. I run into a lot of clients who will get a book like this, which is a very good start to understand attachment and understand what's going on. They read the book, and that's where it ends. And Or they read the book in a weekend, and that's where it ends. Books like this, if we're going to really integrate them, my feeling is with my clients is I really encourage you to read maybe a chapter, at the most 2 chapters in a week. Try to reflect on it, try to integrate some of the things you've learned, and take time. There's no rush. You don't have to get through a book in a weekend. If you do a chapter at a time per week, you're much more likely to be able to both get insight, because you're spending more time thinking about it over 8, 10, 12 weeks. Plus, you're more likely to create change, because change takes time. And we can't rush into altering our personalities or relationships dramatically. It takes time. What are your feelings on that, Heather?
Yeah, I like to look at, there are a lot of psychologists and therapists that talk about the things we learn as a toolbox of things that we'll use in our day to day. So we don't just have a hammer that we use for everything. We don't just have a measuring tape. We have lots of different things, and we need all of those to build something new. The same with our self-help book. It's giving us some insight, some information, but we have other resources like a therapist, being able to go to a group study, finding ways we can enhance what we already are becoming aware of, right? We're learning a little bit with the book, and we're learning even more of how to cultivate growth and our wellness through that whole journey. So yes, I think it's a piece. It's a tool. Yeah.
So one of the things I want to talk about as we review every self-help book we discuss during these podcasts is let's talk about some dangers with this particular book, or some limitations. Let's use the word limitations as opposed to dangers. Before I kind of talk about mine, what would you say are some concerns that you might have, or dangers or risks you might see of how people may take this book?
Yeah, some of the limitations are, there are 3 different categories. And one that kind of really jumped out at me is if you're in possibly an avoidant category, there's not a lot of growth potential that is talked about within the book. They do touch on it, but a lot of it is to avoid avoidant. So talking about how we do that and how we help people that might be in that category grow. What are we doing to enhance their well-being? And then some of that is going back to labels and names are great, but we don't want to pigeonhole people into a space where they can't move forward. And I saw a little bit of that through the book. We do that with everything that we kind of classify with names and labels. It gives us a direction, but we don't want it to be the end all be all. So that's one of the areas I would say are move around or don't go to that danger zone.
And I'd have to agree. That's one of the risks with categories like this. It becomes us and them. It's really easy to write people off, say, well, they fit in this category. That's just not a good match for me. So I limit them. Again, as a Christian psychologist and working with my clients, we want to love everyone. We want to connect with everyone that we can. And we don't want to write people off simply because they fit in a category that a book or several books say may not be the best match for us. We can still have healthy relationships with them. We can still interact with people that have a very different attachment style. But what we need to do is understand what the limitations might be there, but it doesn't mean we don't have a relationship with that person. So that would be the only, when I read through the book, that's the one thing that's a concern of mine, is that as you go through this book, don't use it as an excuse to cut off people or necessarily even a reason to end a relationship. This book may help you understand that maybe you and your significant other have very different attachment styles. So it becomes a point of launching a discussion, a point of launching maybe personal development between the two of you. But I really encourage people, don't use this as an excuse to just, I'm going to cut this relationship off because the book says we don't match, or we're going to be really difficult if we're together. So, but other than that, I think it's a great book. I think it could be very helpful for people to, again, start getting that insight. But I didn't really see anything else that was just very concerning about that. Anything else that you noticed, Heather, that was of any concern to you?
Yeah, no, the one thing I would kind of wonder is where to use it in relationships. So it's a good tool for people who are in a relationship, for couples who are maybe working through things, but it's also a really great tool for people who are just considering what their relationships are going to look like in the future. So we can't map out every dating scenario, and going through what I call a cookie cutter courtship, that you can't make everything work to your design. But if you have this knowledge going in, I think it's almost more valuable as a single to go in and say, I have this information. I already am aware. So as a couple, it's good to be in the thick of it and really starting to break down some of the barriers of communication that maybe have built up, especially when you're talking about, I've become aware we're different attachment styles. We're differently bonded adults. So yeah, I'm not sure where you're at on who's the best person to pick up this book and run with it.
I think for most adults, I could even see teenagers who are starting to understand relationships and go through a lot of those initial struggles, learning again, a basic rubric, a basic set of categories to start to understand that we are different in how we connect and bond. I think a lot of times one nice thing that this book does help is people not take all the blame themselves. I think sometimes when relationships fail, there's a group of us out there that just when the relationship fails, it's what did I screw up? What's wrong with me? Why am I such a failure in this? Because this is yet another ended relationship that I didn't want. It does help you start to understand that, you know what, there's a mismatch. It doesn't mean failure. It may be that we were a mismatch and we were destined to have a difficult relationship and we didn't have insight into those differences. And so we didn't really work on them. So I do see this as a book that may help you early on in romantic relationships and dating, and may help the earlier that you do start to look at the different ways we attach and the way yourself attaches to others. So I do think across the spectrum of my clients, I think this could be a good book to start discussing attachment and how that's laid out in their life and how that's impacted them. And it'll be very interesting to see with some of my older clients who are very set in their personalities and their ways, how they respond to this, because I have not used this very much with my clients that are, say, over 50 that I'm working with. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of response I get there.
Absolutely. Kind of trying it out to see, hey, where are you feeling this meets your need? I kind of almost like talking attachment. So yeah.
Well, Heather, I do appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Christian Shrink podcast. How can people reach out to you? If somebody's interested in contacting you, can you give us your website or some way that people can reach you?
Absolutely. So I am on social media, so I can be found on Facebook and also online on my website at salvarecoachingcounseling.com. And I can provide that kind of the name and how you spell that for other people so they can find me, and they can always just reach out to me by phone and leave me a message on my website. So yes,
we will
be happy to.
Heather's link, if you're looking at this on our podcast page or other places, we'll include Heather's link to her website. So if you want to reach out to her, as always, you can reach me at davidlombard.com or at yourchristianpsychologist.com. Thank you for listening to us today. Look forward to seeing you again at our next podcast. As always, God bless and take care. Bye-bye.